Welcome to Quilting's first reality show. Yes. Unscripted and live with Susan Smith. Yes.
Okay. Welcome, welcome, quilty friends. I'm Susan Smith. You are in my studio, Stitched by Susan. This is a live and unscripted show. We are actually streaming live. This is the whole deal. And by the way, thanks to our son Will, who did that intro for us. He loves doing all kinds of voices, and it amuses me to have various introductions to use, and so he does those for me. So thanks to Will for that. A couple other credits are due here before we get going as well. Our good friend Dan graciously allows us to use his beautiful music as a background to our show, so we appreciate that. And also my husband Dave, who is my co-producer, maybe the guy in charge. Mr. Producer, I always call him. Anyway, he's over there behind a bank of monitors and wires and routers and things, keeping all the wheels turning, keeping all the balls in the air, so to speak. So I sure appreciate that. This is not a one-woman show by any means. I could not do it without him. So today's project is going to be a edge-to-edge design. These live and unscripted episodes have a theme, which is I work through something, and it is not specifically a lesson. So I don't tell you how to do everything. It's more a big picture view so that you're kind of watching over my shoulder and just seeing how I work in my studio. And I talk through decisions as I make them, or various choices that hopefully help, especially newer quilters. There can be an overwhelming number of choices as you're loading a quilt. You know, sideways, right side up, seam horizontal, seam vertical. How do I choose thread? All these things. So I just talk through those processes as I work. So these obviously are aired on YouTube, and we invite, if you wish, for you to support our show. It is our dream to get better cameras. Currently, we stream just on our iPhones. But we do want to keep upgrading the product that we're offering and get better and better so that you can see the quilting more and more. So if you wish to support, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Stitched by Susan. There, for as little as $5, you can make a one-time contribution, or you can choose a monthly one if you wish. We sure do appreciate it. I know I've talked in some other episodes, but I'll mention it today too. We've done a number of things with that money. The camera that does all the close-up work on the quilting is a GoPro, and we invested in that because they're so good at managing motion. So the vibration, it gave us a much, much better picture for that purpose. We've also invested in a rolling table for Mr. Producer. When we started this show, from his office, he would have to unplug all the things, carry them down the hall to my studio, plug all the things back in, and it was a couple-hour process every time. So now he has a movable desk. So he just has a master plug-in, unplug it, roll down the hall, plug it back in. I mean, there's always a little tweaking going on, but it's much, much easier. So that's one of the things that we've done with your support, and we sure do appreciate it every time. So once again, if you enjoy and find value in this show, would you hit the thumbs up below the video? That helps me to be seen a little more across YouTube. As far as I know, I'm the only person out there live streaming quilting, and it truly is live. Thread breaks, you might see. One time I ran out of backing before I ran out of quilt. You got to see that too. It's live. But you know, what happens here stays here, right? Anyway, let's get on with our quilts, okay? Let's get started. I'm going to grab the backing. Mr. Producer is telling me there's a comment that I've got to read right now. So, let's have it. Betsy, you should be nominated for an Oscar. For my composure, if nothing else, right? When crazy things happen. So the quilt that I'm working on today belongs to a client. I've done a few of hers on YouTube episodes before. She very graciously allows me to do that. And she pieces a lot of her backings. I'm just going to move a little bit more left. That will look a little better on the camera. How's that? So you can see this backing is pieced. And you can even see there are a number of seams within the squares that are pieced. There are seams. And you know what? I'm totally okay with that as a quilter. It's fairly important that it be reasonably flat because, of course, I can't see it when I'm quilting, but Laura's backs are nice and flat and beautiful. I don't mind at all working with a pieced backing. She's trying to use up scraps, so this is a great way to do it. So a couple other points. Her squares are regular and symmetrical, so I want to center my quilt within them, right? I don't want to go off to one edge or all the way to the top, because that will show quite a bit on the back. So I'm doing it in a kind of general way. It's not going to be precise, but probably within 1/4 or 1/2 of an inch. So here's the things that I'm doing. Obviously the top I'll be able to see. I'm bobbing back and forth between cameras and I don't always know which one is on. I will be able to see the sides of it with my quilt top on while I'm quilting, so that's fairly easy, right? I can just visually adjust that. Top to bottom is more difficult because my backing is going to be fully rolled on and I won't be able to see this bottom edge, right? So what I did is I laid it out. I have a large set of tables in my cutting room. You may not, you might have to do it on the floor, but I laid the backing out with the top on it first. And I got the center of the top lined up with the center of the backing. And then I smoothed it out, and at the top edge of my quilt, I just put a pin in where the top edge of the quilt top is, and you'll see it as I work. That just means when I go to load my top on here, I've got an exact place to put the top of it. There might be a little bit of flex because it's fabric on rollers and so forth, but like I said, within 1/2 or even 1/4 of an inch, it will be pretty darn close. So let's get it loaded. As always, I'm using my red snapper system. There are other episodes in which I go into this in a little more depth. I'm just going to quickly get it loaded today, but you can see how pretty straightforward it is. There's a plastic rod running through my leader hem, and this clamp just snaps right over it.
Sorry for the little wiggle, guys.
We apologize if there's a wiggle in the camera. Dave's just making a few adjustments there for us. So I'm just lining up the nice straight edge of this backing with the straight hem on my leader, snapping it all into place. My long arm, by the way, is a Gamble 26-inch, and her name is Lucy. So I'm just moving Lucy off to one side. And I have a really quick and efficient way of loading. As you can see, I've got my back snapped on the front, and now I come around to the other side of my long arm and I pull the whole thing over the rail so it's hanging down straight. And this is critical. This is why I don't have to measure the center of the backing, the center of the quilt, and so forth. But I have to be sure my backing is straight. I do not want it pulled off to one side. Do you see how it starts making funny angles in the fabric when I do that? So I'm watching that that is nice and straight and smooth over this top rail. At that point, I can come back around and just roll that backing on and know that it's pulling straight on. And I'm just watching to see when it's just past my leader hem, and then I will clamp on the other side. All right, and just like that, and that's not very many minutes, I have a backing loaded, and as you can see, it is straight and smooth. Thing of beauty. Don't know if you guys can see this in the camera, but my little pin is right here. That's where the top of my quilt is going to line up. At one time, I used to measure a distance down from the top. But of course, the edge of my quilt goes right under that little snapper, right? And then I was kind of guessing how much fabric was taken up in there. And then I thought, you know, just drop a pin in it. Wasn't that the Bolt movie that he kept saying, just put a pin in it. Just put a pin in it right there. We'll just leave that right there. I feel like that. Okay, batting. I'm using Hobbs 8020, which is a fabulous sort of all-purpose batting. I often get asked which side goes up or down. Hobbs 8020, I think this is premium, what's it called? Heirloom Premium, I think is the official name. 8020 Heirloom Premium. It's not built on a scrim, and so it doesn't have a top or a bottom the way that Warm and Natural, for example, does. So it doesn't really matter which way you go with it. I'm just watching for my little pin up there, making sure I have a little extra batting above it. And here's my quilt top. Now today, I have chosen to load my quilt with the length of it running from side to side. So this is longer than this. Does that make sense? And when, just looking for my pin there, what makes that decision for me often is the direction of the seam on the backing. It's more efficient to have it lengthwise this way so that there are fewer advances as I'm quilting, right? If my quilting design is non-directional, that's more efficient. But sometimes if there is just one seam in the backing, I like to have that seam horizontal, so sometimes I will change which way I load it. Sometimes it's directional quilting design, so I'll change which way I load it. But all other things being equal, I prefer my quilt to be lengthwise across the rail in front of me. So again, I'm double checking where my pin is there, having the top of my quilt right against it, and then I'm going to take the pin out because I don't want to stitch over it without being able to see it. And now we're going to baste in place. And after I baste, I will talk about thread choices because I have some thoughts about that. You know I do. I always joke that when you're talking about thread choices, you ask 2 quilters and you'll get 3 opinions. And that's kind of the truth. So all you're going to hear is my opinion. Lots of quilters pin this all in place first. That is entirely up to you and how comfortable you feel just winging it. I feel comfortable, and like I said, I've just invited you into my studio, so this is how I do it. This is not the one way to do it. This is just how I work. There are quite a lot of seams across the top edge of this quilt, so I am being quite careful not to stretch them open. And I use my left hand on the side that's already been stitched to put a little bit of pressure there. That keeps the fabric feeding under the needle smoothly and prevents it from racing out ahead or being pushed ahead of my hopper foot. It's not really racing. But if I didn't manage that, it would get pushed ahead of the hopper. Every time I went over a seam allowance, it would push a little further forward. So I just kind of manipulate that gently with my left hand, and it works pretty good. I'm lucky enough to have channel locks on my machine, so I usually turn them on for this basting portion because then I know I have exactly square corners on my quilt. And I actually manipulate the edges of my quilt to line up with the stitching that I know is perfectly straight. You saw me doing that on the top. I adjusted it a couple times to be in that straight line. Okay, let us talk about thread. We need a bigger picture view, dear. I've got a whole bunch of spools of thread here to talk about with you guys. And I'm going to grab one more because the one I'm actually using, I loaded onto the machine, and I'm going to get a spare here. Out of camera for a second. Okay. Thread. It's a beautiful thing. Is that better? Is that sounding better? There we go. All right. This quilt, as you can see, has lots of colors in it. It's got a rich brown. It's got a rusty brown. It's got tan. Obviously, the background's kind of a deep tan. It's got a rich red. It's got greens, golds, all kinds of things going on in it. What to choose for thread? Again, I'll take the glasses off so they stop glaring. This is my thread philosophy. On a quilt like this, I'm going to quilt all over it. The quilting is going to be equally dense on all the different areas. I want my thread to show about the same amount on all the fabrics. Does that make sense? So where a lot of quilters would say, pick the lightest color and use that for thread, I don't love that because what'll happen is my light stitching will almost disappear in these light areas. And then when I get to the darker areas, it'll really show up. So it almost looks like it's stopping and starting, to me. My opinion. I'm honest about that. So I feel the same way then about using dark threads because they'll almost disappear in the fabrics they exactly match, and then they'll show up high contrast on this tan background. So that for me took out the dark brown, took out the dark red, and left me with a few choices. This is kind of a mid-level tan. These colors are probably not true on camera, so that's why I'm going to describe them to you a little bit. This is the deep gold that's in the quilt. This is an aqua green, and this is the paler caramel. So what I finally came down to was this mid caramel. Now, it's not really in the quilt much at all. There's 1 or 2 pieces that are this color. Most fabrics are either lighter or darker, but I quite like it for that reason. It's in the same color family, it blends, and it shows up similarly across the red, the green, the brown, and the tan, and I like that. So that's the color I've chosen to use, and I have the same one both top and bottom. And I might mention too, that sometimes influences my thread choices, like what is on the backing. If it had been predominantly greens, for example, I might have chosen to go with the olive green because that would blend well on the backing. You guys can't see it, but the backing has a lot of the caramels and golds. And so this thread I think looks really good on the backing as well. So I've loaded it top and bottom. It is Isocord brand, 100% poly, 40 weight thread. That's what I'm using. So let's swoop these all away and get quilting. Maybe let's take a few questions if we have some before I actually dive into the quilting. And Susan will get a sip of coffee. And I'm standing well back from the quilt. Okay, well, I can't look at that camera and read the comments, though. We're going to change cameras. Okay, let's see Lauren's comment again. Why do you not secure your backing to the sides of the machine before you baste the top? Ah, good question, Lauren. Here's why. If I were to put the side clamps on, I don't think we have to, Dave. Dave's asking if I want a different camera view. If I put the side clamps on the backing first and then smooth out the top, I feel like there's more tension on the backing than there is on the top. So I prefer to have both fabrics 100% relaxed when I'm doing the basting. Before I start quilting, I will then put my clamps on the right and left side, and now the entire quilt, backing, batting, and quilt, all have exactly the same tension. That makes sense? That's why. Sue Donnelly, do you sew the red snapper parts to the leader and end before original use? Nope, they're not sewn in. Leaders may be different on different machines, but on my machine they came with a generous hem, and there's just this tiny little pole of the red snapper plastic, and it just slides right in there. Easy peasy. I just got red snappers. It says to sew a 3/4 inch seam on my leaders to get the rod in tight. Is that necessary? Don't want to disturb my leaders. I just slid mine into the existing hem, and I wouldn't say they're held terribly snugly. I can shift them if I need to. They don't go right to the end of my leaders. So that's what I did, and it worked for me. Kate, I would like to do the same kind of thing with some of my scrap materials. Are there any specific issues with having too many seams? There's not. Like a long arm machine will have no trouble quilting over them. The only thing is, after the quilt is loaded, right, you can't see that back. So you need to be reasonably confident that you've got it fairly flat. You know, that you're not easing in one seam into another, and then you've got puckers underneath that you're not able to see and deal with the way you could deal with them if they're on the top surface, if that makes sense too. I always say, if that makes sense. I just want to make sure that I'm getting it clear. Okay, let's get quilting. So our the clamps for the sides are part of my red snapper system as well. It's not that I necessarily go for this brand, but what matters to me is that I have a long clamp. So the throat space on my machine is 26 inches. So I believe my clamps are 19 inches. And Dave's apologizing for the wiggle, by the way. He's adjusting the camera again. I like to have that long grasp as opposed to having, you know, 2 short clamps or even 1 small one. It just gives nice, even tension across the whole surface of the quilt. And then I attach my side clamp to it, and I just put very gentle tension on that. I'm not trying to create a drum out of my quilt. I'm just trying to keep it from being able to move. And then lastly, I insert, you guys can see it here. Yeah, you can see me on the other end. I insert a brace, if you will, under that clamp just to hold it up and out of the way. And you saw me with a pin in my hand on the other end. Sometimes a fingernail will work too. If your edge is not 100% smooth, you're feeding it into a very thin channel, at least on these clamps I am. And so it can be useful to have the edge of a pin or maybe a fingernail or cardstock to kind of smooth that edge in there. So once again, putting the clamp on and then the yardstick, or I've seen people use curtain rods on this end, any long thing that will extend across your rails, and just lift that strap a little bit so the long arm doesn't hit your side clamps. Let's be different today and start on the right, just because we can. Oh, we have a clarification coming? All right. For my red snapper question, I don't mean sewing at the ends of leaders, but all the way across. Still not necessary. All I can say for sure is I didn't do it. I just slid the rod in. You know, it's pulled this way, right? So the red snapper's not going to slide anywhere on you, I don't think. That's my opinion. So today the design that we're quilting I call a topographical meander. It is super simple and creates some really great texture. And I think is suited to these kind of autumnal colors. Laura's quilts are always really nice and flat, but this design is a great one if you've got a quilt that's got some excess fluffy fabric that you've got to take up. This is a really great one for doing it. As you can see, I'm just making extremely irregular shapes. And you can get some fun ideas for these shapes literally by looking at a topographical map. I don't think that I'm actually that scientific about it. I just wing it. But if you look at a map, it will give you a sense of how irregular the shapes can be and still look really great and create some fabulous quilted texture. So Mr. Producer is saying to me, someone is questioning why no magnets. And I deduce that you are a regular watcher and know that I should have put magnets on the front. So now I'm going to stop and do that. Alrighty, so here are my magnetic bars. They're just the type that you would get from a hardware store, like to hang your knives on in your kitchen or your tools in your garage. And my machine has magnetic rails, iron rails. And so these magnet bars go right on the front. And the purpose of them, The purpose of them is to secure this fourth side of my quilt, which makes total sense, right? I've basted this side, I've basted across the top, I've basted on the right side. I need to secure this fourth side. Otherwise, it tends to pull up as I'm quilting. So thank you to whoever reminded me, and they're in place now. Lauren reminded me. I'm never sure which camera I'm on. I'm sorry if I'm looking at the wrong one. Thank you, Lauren, for the reminder. I appreciate it. I count on all of you for my continued success with these quilts. Who knows what I might forget to do otherwise while I'm talking. It's funny, I don't seem to have too much trouble quilting while I talk, but I often have trouble remembering things like that. As you can see, one of the beauties of this design is that I can just create echoes or to travel if I want to get to a different area. So if I want to get back up to the top, I can just travel along with a similar spacing and go wherever I want to quilt next. Now I left a kind of funny corner there showing you, but that's okay. It's topographical. We'll be able to squeeze something in there quite easily. If you happen to want to work on your one-handed quilting skills, this is a great design to practice on because a few wobbles are a good thing. Many of you will know the difference between constant and regulated stitching speeds, but if there's perhaps some of you who don't, let me quickly describe them. What I'm stitching in now is a regulated speed, so the motor of my machine is trying to regulate the stitch length, so when I move more slowly, the motor goes more slowly. Perhaps you can hear that. When I'm in a constant or unregulated mode, when I push the start button, the machine just starts stitching at a fixed rate that I had to choose in advance. I quite like stitching in that constant mode. I feel like it's smoother. There's just a little bit of resistance or jerkiness when the motor is always trying to adjust and compensate the speed. So when I start on the next pass, I'm going to talk a little less and I'm going to go into that constant mode so you can see what it looks like. If you have not tried it, I really encourage you to. It takes a bit of getting used to. It's a bit startling when you first start out, so you might want to start with a much slower speed until you get the feel of it. But it really, I think, improves your quilting skill and I think it makes smoother quilting. Again, my opinion. You've realized by now that I have opinions, right? And everybody's entitled to them. The constant speed really requires you, too, as a quilter, to get smooth in your movements, because how fast you move is determining the stitch length. And so you want to be consistent in the speed of your moving, by and large. So that's why I think it makes a better quilter. It's sort of like reading the hard books, you know? It's tougher. It's mentally, it takes more effort, but that's what grows your vocabulary. It's a little bit like that. Here we are at the edge. Type in your questions if you have them so far. I will undo all the apparatus holding things in place. It really helps us actually if you put a Q in front of your questions, a capital Q, and a colon, which is the 2 dots. That way, if they go fast and we kind of lose track of them, Dave can do a quick search for the Q colon things and find the questions in a hurry. So if you don't mind, that is helpful. I'm just going to unpin Laura's little note off here. I will, over the next couple of days, I'll post some pictures on social media of this quilt as well. And Laura gave me the details of the pattern and the book that she found it in. So if anyone's wanting to make this lovely scrappy quilt, I will pass on those details to you. It's called an Old-Fashioned Quilt, but she gave me the name of a book that it is in as well, which I cannot now remember off the top of my head. But okay, you're seeing me do a couple things here, and I should be talking through them. On this front rail, my quilt is floating, right? I've got my end right here in place, and also my batting is floating. It's just hanging down here in front of me. But I want to be sure that they're smooth down the quilt, not faster on one side or the middle than another area, right? My quick way is always to run along and just grab a pinch of both quilt top and batting and do a little tug. And then I can see that that batting has smoothed out. If I don't do that, the batting tends for some reason to pull up in the center if you don't manage it as you go. If that doesn't feel like enough control to you, you can just flip up the top because it's floated, right? And then you can see that batting. Give some little tugs to it to make sure it's smooth. Pull the top back down. And I tend to smooth my top pretty firmly against my rail. That gets all the crumples out of it. I also visually check that my seam allowances are running straight along this rail. That too helps to make sure that everything's loading smoothly and straight. I mean, there are certainly other methods which involve like basting the whole quilt before you start quilting the design, and some quilters do that too. But for me, I've found this to work pretty well. If I keep an eye on things as I'm advancing, I can keep it straight without that extra step. I'm just going to baste the left side here. So basically with every pass, I'll go and baste the left side and the right side again. And I'll put my magnets on the front. I'm just going to baste the left and move Lucy out of the way, and then we'll take a few questions or comments that you have while I get in a sip of coffee. Okay, there's Lucy relocated. Let's chat. Sue, my hubs is geologist and likes your pattern today. Lovely, glad I could please. Yeah, it's really fun when the texture is super in a finished quilt. Dylan's grandma, I remembered. I would like to quilt right to left, but my Juki long arm will go about 6 to 8 inches, then the needle thread shreds and breaks. Any help for that? Thank you. Ideally, you would talk to some other people who own Jukis. For me, on my machine, there's 2 things I look for. Make sure that the eye of the needle is large enough for the type of thread that you're using. So the thread website would probably have information on that, on pairing those up. And secondly, on my machine, I turn the eye of the needle slightly to one side or slightly to the other. If you're thinking of a clock, you know, and 6 o'clock is toward me, it's like to 5:30 or 6:30, maybe not even that much, a very small amount. It has to do with how the rocker, you know, is grabbing the thread and forming the stitch underneath in the bobbin area. So shifting that needle a little bit can sometimes fix that when you're going in the other direction. So give it a try, one direction or the other. Some swear by left and some swear by right. I've tried them both. So give that a try. Lauren, this topographical pattern really fits this quilt with the quilter's choice of her background fabric. It does, these autumnal sort of earthy colors. Yeah, seemed like the perfect choice. Vicky, the side clamps are awesome and hope to get some soon, but for now I use paint sticks and regular small utility clips. Absolutely. Absolutely do what you must. Yep. I've used all kinds of things too, and sometimes the edges are so uneven that I can't get my long clips on and I have to use the single ones. You just do what you got to do. Shelley, do you have a rule of thumb for quilt design to complement the piecing? Flowing flowery for geometric and geometric for curved, or does it matter at all? My personal tendency is toward contrast, but I always confer with the quilt maker. Because they're, you know, it's a matter of taste. It really is. So I don't honestly have a rule of thumb. My taste runs toward contrast. Diane, do I see a bubble in the batting at your far right edge? This one here? If so, it's very small. If you mean under the quilt, I don't think so. I don't feel any bubbles in there. But thanks for the heads up. And maybe you said that before I smoothed it out. I'm not sure when that came in. Joanne, I can't use the red snappers. Maybe you were typing because. Well, if you want to finish that thought, go for it. That's it? Okay, one last sip. Let's put the left clamp on while we're over here, and then we'll go baste the right side. And I'm just using my corsage pin to help nudge the fabric into that little channel. For those of you who are just acquiring the clamps, I've been asked a few times before, they're really hard to get on. Do they get any easier to open and shut? And they do. With repeated use, they get easier. And if they're really giving you grief, like other plastic things, maybe try warming them up a little bit. With a blow dryer, run them under warm water. I don't know, that might get the cords wet. Sit them on a register, something like that. That always makes plastics, like Tupperware lids, right? A little more flexible and easy to use. Okay, we're getting ready to start our next pass. If you are enjoying this, I would so appreciate if you would hit the like button, if you would subscribe to the channel, and if you click the bell after you subscribe, you will actually receive notifications when I go live. I try really hard to send out advance notification in my newsletters, but I'm a bit of a one-woman show, so it does not always get done. I endeavor to send out advance notice in the newsletters and even a picture and some of the topics that I'm working on, because I think, that might matter to you guys to know what's coming. All right. One of my rules of thumb is that I alternate quilting directions. So my first pass was from my right to my left. This time I'm going to go from my left to my right. I think it keeps the quilting from looking like it's been done in rows. It just helps to keep it organic and random looking. And this time I'm going to stitch in constant speed. I know you're going to ask me what speed I use, and I'll tell you it's 55, but I don't know that that will help you guys. A different one might be comfortable for you, or your machine might be different. So you just have to experiment. I don't think there's a shortcut for that. I have often said to quilters, if you feel like there's a stiff wind at your back and you're being pushed, it's going too fast. If you feel kind of like you're rushing to keep up. And someone said to me the other day, and if you feel like you're pushing a wheelbarrow up the hill, you're going too slow. So that's a good mental picture to try and judge the speed. What does it feel like? You should be able to feel fairly comfortable driving at this speed, whatever speed you choose. I'm pleased that the in-house geologist likes this design. It is often difficult to come up with designs that are suitable for, more masculine quilts that don't have frills or feathers or flowers or curlicues. And this certainly is a great one. And I mean, lots of people love it. That doesn't keep it only for the men, but it is a nice one to have in your repertoire for sure. So while I'm doing this rather mindless quilting, for those of you who are new today, let me tell you a little bit what I'm about. This style of freehand and edge-to-edge work is what I absolutely love. I love to show that it can be beautiful, that anybody can do it, and of course, it kind of goes without saying, but I'll underline it anyway, it's very economical. It's economical in terms of money because you don't have to buy pantographs or digital designs, but it's also really economical in terms of time. You guys saw me load the quilt, and then when I have no paper pantograph to load, or no nesting or lining up of edges to worry about when I do advances, that really saves time. Like, we're going to be on air, I suspect, less than 2 hours today, and I will have finished an entire quilt from beginning to end in that period of time. So it's really economical. So to me, absolute win-win. So I absolutely love to present these live and unscripted, live streaming of doing this type of work in my studio. But if you want to explore further, I do have an online masterclass, and enrollment is going to be opening in June for that. So at my website, stitchedbysusan.com, there's a masterclass tab at the top if you want to read more about that. I won't talk at length about it here. But if you want to find out more about it, the information is all there. And leading up to it, I'm going to have a few smaller workshops, with similar topics in mind. Things that aren't included in the masterclass, but that might help you to see if this is a style of quilting that you like or something you want to pursue. And maybe answer your questions and give you a bit of freedom to explore your quilting style. So if you're signed up for my newsletter, you will certainly get notifications of those workshops as they come. I think that Dave's going to put a link into the chat window, and after we've finished this episode, I will go back and put a link in. We can't do it beforehand when we're live, but I will go back afterwards and add a handy little link in the corner of the window if you wish to sign up for my newsletter. I know newsletters can be a bit of almost an annoyance in your inbox, so I try not to send them too frequently. In general, they're about twice a month, letting you know when these live and unscripteds are coming up, letting you know about the most recent podcast release, which I haven't talked about at all yet. And then in the case of the opening enrollment for my masterclass, there will be a few surrounding that, and then they'll be over, and slow down again for a while. I try to only write when I have, something of interest to say. It is really my goal to help quilters to see that they can do this, that it's within their wheelhouse. There's a systematic way to practice and add designs to your repertoire and add skill, to your control level. And that just opens a world for you to not only quilt the designs that I teach in my masterclass, but to go and find ideas and design your own. And there are principles. There are designs that work well, that look graceful, that are easy and logical to quilt, and there are designs that aren't. And so that's part of my class too, is to try and analyze designs in that way. What works well? How can I change one that's not working? That sort of thing. I mentioned the podcast really briefly in passing. I do a weekly podcast, and it is interviews with other quilters. Some of them who do quilting as a business, some who don't, who just have a story that I think is really interesting or inspiring. So it's just casual conversations with other quilters. It is called Measure Twice, Cut Once, and Other Life Lessons Learned from Quilters. And this most recent week, my guest was Audrey Essery. If you're on Instagram, you'll know her as Cotton and Bourbon. She does some very graphic, quite contemporary art quilts, and they're absolutely stunning. Her attention to detail, her piecing, her quilting, all of it together creates amazing works of art. And it's fascinating to hear her story of how she experimented and explored and finally landed on what is her current, very recognizable style. This is certainly a quilting design that ticks all my boxes, if you will, for a really useful and user-friendly quilting design. It's easy to squeeze into awkward corners. It certainly is easy to memorize because there really isn't any. There's no, pausing to figure out where in the world do I start this design and how do I know what to do next, because it's so organic. It creates even texture, which is something that I like. I don't love 2-inch unquilted spaces and then 1/4-inch lines next to each other. I love a fairly even texture. Again, my personal preference. But that ticks a box for me. Easy to travel and maneuver your way around the quilt top. That's always important. I'm certainly happy with this thread color choice too. It's doing all the things I asked of it, I think. Another simple gauge for the speed of your stitching is if your stitches are looking long, you need to speed up a little bit. If your stitches are teeny, 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 tiny and cramped together, you need to slow down a little with your machine speed. I like to stitch when I have the regulator on with about a 13, a 12 or a 13. And so that's kind of what my eye looks for in stitch length. So as I quilt, I'm kind of, reviewing that mentally every so often. Do my stitches look way longer than a 12 or way shorter? And if so, adjust my speed accordingly. You guys can see them there on the brown. I'm happy with that. Okay, that's the next pass. I'll undo everything, pop in any questions or comments you've got. I'm advancing my quilt. I leave the needle down when I do this on most quilts because it's easier. There's no need to break thread. I don't find that it distorts the quilt noticeably, and so all else being equal, I leave my needle down. I'm just going to quickly baste the bottom edge of this, and then I will roll the quilt back just a little bit so you guys can see that top edge. I'm just so close to the bottom, I want to go ahead and baste all the way around it so it's secure and not shifting. I do like to put the channel lock on for the bottom edge. That way I know that it's straight and I can make adjustments if I need to the fabric as I go. One little caveat, you've got to absolutely know that you can keep your fingers down if you're going to be this close to where it's stitching. If you're not comfortable with that, drop in a few pins instead. Don't feel like you have to do this just because Susan does. Again, my goal is to make sure that all those seams don't get pushed forward. They get under the hopper foot when they should. And I keep kind of glancing up at the big picture to make sure my seams are, straight, parallel, perpendicular, Everything's looking square. I'm not measuring with great precision. This is, you know, a comfort quilt, if you will. But it's going to be pretty darn square when it's finished. I don't usually go to great lengths unless, you know, it's a show quilt or it's got a lot of bias in it, you know, and some extra feature that I really need to control. In this case, we don't have any of that. Okay, let me just roll the quilt back a hair so you can see that top edge better as I quilt. Mr. Producer is concerned that I said that wrong about speeding up and slowing down, and I can't honestly remember how I said it, so I'm going to say it one more time. If your stitches are looking long and unwieldy, you need to have your machine speed a little faster. That will make your needle go a little quicker and make a little shorter stitches. If your stitches are very tight and close together, you need to slow down your machine speed so the needle hits a little less often. Does that make sense? Perhaps I said it right both times, in which case you've just got a confirmation, that's all. Okay, Mr. Producer is clarifying for me, yes. I'm not talking about how fast you're physically moving the head. I was talking about speeding up or slowing down the motor speed. Because, of course, he's absolutely right. Another way to adjust is to adjust how fast your hands are going. The thing is, your hands are going to have a pretty comfortable pace of moving, and so at that point, adjust the machine speed to either keep up or slow down with your comfortable hand speed. I hope that all is pretty much as clear as mud. Okay, last time we started at the left, so this time we're going to start on the right. I will move Lucy, and we will take some questions, and Susan will have some magic elixir. Alrighty, Tiffany's Quilting Life. Hi, Susan. Can't stay long, but I'll watch the replay. Tiffany, by the way, has an awesome YouTube channel called Tiffany's Quilting Life. And she does a lot of casual shows, too. She does other things besides long arm quilting. It can be opening her mail or piecing, all kinds of things. But if you're, you know, awake in the wee hours or just need something to listen to, check out Tiffany's show. It's great. Oh, yeah, that's right. She will be a guest on the podcast. I think her episode airs in 2 weeks' time. We've already interviewed, but it'll be a couple weeks till it airs, so be watching for that. Tiffany has a really inspiring story. Sue Tap, I really like this constant mode. The regulated mode makes me too anxious and nervous. I think it's the sound that bothers me. I hear that from more people, Sue, and I don't know that it makes me nervous, but I do know it's more tiring for me to have the motor constantly speeding up and slowing down. So I find it more relaxing to quilt with the constant speed. Also, my mechanic, my service person for my machine said that it actually wears the motor faster too, to have that constant adjustment going on, and that kind of makes sense. Lori, I see that in some places you are traveling pretty far. Good to know, as it takes away some of the anxiety of getting trapped in spots on the design. Yeah, this is a great design for that. You could travel all the way across the quilt top if you wanted to. Absolutely, no limits. Dylan's grandmother. I had an 18 needle omni thread and needle set at 5 o'clock. Beats me. Oh, a size 18 needle omni thread, needle set at 5 o'clock. You know, again, I would try conferring with other machine owners. I mean, there are other things, like try a different spool. Every so often, you just get a dud spool. Certainly try a different brand of thread is an option. Machines really have preferences, sad to say. Some machines don't seem to, but some machines really strongly do. So that's a thing. Okay, that's it. Get my lukewarm elixir in. This will be our last pass. Am I back far enough for this to be visible? We're just going to have a look. Right there? I think so. The roll is just kind of almost getting in the way of you guys' vision, but I want to be able to finish the pass as I go across. So, and I'm going to speed up my stitching just a hair. These are quite big movements, and I'm finding that I could go just a little speedier. Just 3 or 4 points. All right, here we go. And we're out of bobbin thread, just like that. And of course, because I was stitching at such a great speed, it flung the needle thread. Alrighty, let's take a moment. I have to undo, you guys who watch regularly know me, I do this all the time. I just let my bobbin run out. I don't have a counter going or a gauge. And it works pretty well, especially on casual quilts. And then I just go back and do some lock stitches to lock that last little 1/4 inch or so in place. The downside of that is, as your bobbin is running out of thread, the last couple inches do not have proper tension on them. So I do always have to go back and undo a couple inches of stitching. I'm okay with that. That's what I've chosen. If your machine has a good, gauge of where the bobbin is at, more power to you. On my machine, it's just a matter of programming it for how many revolutions of the bobbin. But it's not very accurate, so I end up wasting a ton of thread because I set it, a little bit early, and I don't love that. So my choice is just to do it this way. I run till it runs out, and then I put a fresh bobbin in. And again, I'm using Isacord 100% poly 40 weight thread, and I have the same thread loaded top and bottom. I had another bobbin over there filling. I have a freestanding bobbin winder, so it's all set to go. And you notice I just dropped, can you see it on camera? There we go. I just dropped my seam ripper right where I ended my thread. This quilt is not terribly busy, so it doesn't matter, but I have formed the habit of doing that. Sometimes on a busy quilt, you'll forget where you ended. So I just drop my blue seam ripper right there every time. And that way I don't spend a minute looking for where my tail was. Looking for my tail, chasing my tail. I'm just reloading the bobbin because it didn't come up correctly when I tried to pull up the bottom thread. Seems to be okay. Let's try it one more time. So all I'm doing is holding onto my top thread and pulling up a stitch from the bottom. Only it's not working. Let's take the bobbin all the way out. Did we mention that this is live and unscripted? See, if this was a real video, I'd edit out all these little oopses. But I like you guys to see how it really works. This gives you a chance to know how long things take and what's realistic to expect in terms of perfection or thread breaks or whatever. What in the world? It's not pulling up the bobbin thread. Okay, I can't say I've had that happen before. It seems to be all squared away. I'm going to take my clamp off the side so I can pull Lucy over here and see what's going on. I'm going to get my cleaning brush and give a little whisk under there. Make sure there's no lint. I did clean just before I began this quilt, but just in case, I'm just running down through my kind of mental checklist of things it might be. I'll rethread my needle as well, just to be on the safe side. I'll try and rethread my needle. There we go. Okay, reload the bobbin one more time. I'm just going to take off a foot or so of bobbin thread, just so I have a nice fresh end. And this is how I deal with hiccups like this. I just have this kind of mental checklist of things to try, and I just keep trying them till I find the solution. I'm going to go ahead and take one stitch right here. And it is not grabbing the bobbin thread. You guys, I have never had this happen before. I can see the rocker going around underneath, but it is not catching the thread. What to try next? Perhaps a different bobbin case? Yep, still not catching it. Dave, would you mind getting me that little clear tub right on the far left there? The little clear tub? Yes. So this is what I mean by my bobbin case, right? The part that holds my bobbin. I do have a spare, so we're going to give that a try. Lori is asking, do I not stick a drop of oil in the bobbin casing at every bobbin change? I'll be 100% honest, Lori, because this is live and unscripted. I typically don't. I do it at the end of every quilt. So now that grabbed my bobbin thread very smoothly. So I'm not sure what is wrong. I'll have to investigate that further, but changing that bobbin casing seemed to do the trick this time. Only now it didn't. You guys, this is hilarious. Or something. Another try? Nope. Well, let's try a new needle. We can certainly do that. Okay, next request, Dave. Center drawer right there. Yep. Right hand side near the back, there's a green box of needles. And the little white screwdriver that's right there. I'm sorry, I've got Mr. Producer trotting around off camera, fetching me tools. Okay, so I've got a new needle in my hand, and I'm going to try that. Thanks, you guys, for these ideas. And by the way, I keep in my sewing machine table, I have a drawer with a container just for needles, because I go through quite a few needles and quite a few rotary cutter blades. So I have a container for that, and when it gets fairly full is when I do an actual sharps disposition. I do not just toss my needles in the garbage. And it usually involves, you know, wrapping it up in a parcel and wrapping it with a bajillion layers of tape and then taping it to a sharps disposal location. I could, I suppose, actually get sharps containers. That would be really good, wouldn't it? Maybe I'll do that this week. But in any event, I do keep them all together. That was not the answer. No, that didn't sound good. My needle is straight. It is brand new, so I don't think it's bent. Let's try it without the thread in it. No, definitely not good. Okay, I think I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to put the old needle back in and see if it still does that. Because if it still persists, I'm going to have to look into timing, I feel like. And timing is not a thing that's easy to knock out of place. And I haven't knocked anything, as you guys have seen. So if I'm actually hitting that rocker, that would explain why I'm not getting a stitch formation, but that shouldn't be so. So you see my little trick? I've got this little magnet I can put on the front of my needle that tells me when it's straight on. If you don't have such a magnet, this also works. Just taking a straight pin and inserting it in the eye of the needle. My corsage pins are a bit too thick, but a sewing pin will fit, the tip of it will fit right in there. So you can insert the tip of your pin into the eye of your needle, and that will tell you too whether it's, you know, at 5:30 or 6 o'clock or whatever it is you're trying to aim for. I'm grasping at straws here, folks. I have not had this particular thing happen before. And that needle sounds smooth. Well, did I have the needle in backwards? I can't imagine, but maybe I did. Let's try this again. Those long arm needles have a, we call it a belly. They're kind of bowed toward the front. Isn't this fascinating? It's like watching paint dry. But this is what it looks like. When you have a problem and you're trying to problem solve, it's just try one thing after another thing after another thing. Okay, let's give that a try. Okay, that must have been the problem on my needle. While I was talking, I must have had it in backwards. Okay, so let's tighten that up good. Thread it and see what we get. You know, that's a good idea, folks. Whoever's suggesting lint in the needle plate, I will give that a try if this does not work. Yep, that is not pulling up the bobbin thread. Okay, one more request, Dave. Right-hand drawer. There's a heavier white screwdriver than this one. I should keep all my tools within arm's length, shouldn't I? Beyond this, unless you guys have a great idea, I think I'm stymied for the moment. Let's just see if this works and then we'll talk. It's very hard to get at. Let's unthread the needle. What I really need is a shorter screwdriver, isn't it? A little stubby one. I do not take this needle plate off very often, so maybe that's key. I should be taking it off more frequently. There's one screw. Two. Oh, that one's in there firmly. I'm just going to lock Lucy in place and then she will hold still while I can do this operation. That's 3. Now the last one I can just loosen and then swivel the thing. What do you think we're going to find? We all get to be surprised. It's not too bad, which is good, but also is not going to solve our problem, is it? I do have, by the way, this fluffy paintbrush is my kind of interim linty remover, and after each quilt I try and stop, and I have a small air compressor and I really get it out of here because the brush pretty much gets it out of the bobbin casing, but also just kind of pushes it around a little bit. But I'm not going to start up the air compressor while you guys are on here because it's really loud. So we'll do the best we can with the brush. I do not think that lint was the problem, but it was certainly worth checking. Tis a conundrum. If anyone else has got any brainstorms, type them in. This is just really interesting to me. I've never had this happen before. I've had it happen, you know, with a stitch or two, and then I insert the bobbin casing, and presto, it's fixed. I've never had it not respond to that small change. So this is new territory for me as well. I'm not hearing any ticking or feeling any resistance in the wheel, so I don't think there's anything hindering that, but the rocker is not catching the thread. Okay, I confess I'm stymied, so I think we're done quilting for today. We'll take a minute and take a few more comments, and when I post pictures, I'll post an update as to what in the world happened. Let me get my coffee. I need a restorative. Oh, okay. Let's read some suggestions. Absolutely. That's a great idea, Mr. Producer. Appears that you don't put a drop of oil in the race. Answered that one, Lori. Try turning the needle. I could try that a little more. I will do that, Diane. Tried the new needle. This just happened to me. Timing was off. Required tech to come out and adjust needle bar. It wasn't going low enough. Which it seems so... Yeah, I had a reason, hit a pin and jarred the needle bar. Right, it seems really odd that I'm quilting along on something that is fairly smooth. Like, I honestly have never knocked the timing out on my machine. I've had it tweaked a few times, but it takes a lot to knock the timing out. Betsy, thank goodness for Live and Unscripted. I thought I was the only one that has problems like this. No, and I guess that is the beauty of Live and Unscripted. You see that this does happen. Use a Tic Tac container or old pill bottle for storing used needles. Great tip, Diane. I don't know what position you normally use when installing the needle. If 6 o'clock, try 5:30 or 6:30. That adjusts your timing slightly. Yep, and I was just talking about that earlier in terms of thread shredding and breakage, but let's give it a try.
Let's go through all of these and then you go back.
Oh, okay, apparently there's more comments. Sorry about that. Turn the hand wheel to make sure you got everything. Yes, I did do that, Diane. Good suggestion, though. Is there a piece of thread twisted in the bobbin area? There's not. I looked for that, too. It was nice and clean when I was brushing it out, but good thought. These are all good thoughts. I can't remember, did you try another bobbin? I didn't actually try another bobbin, so that's a good suggestion, Wendy. I'll get another one loading with my same color thread here in just a sec. Shelley, I'm sure this isn't fun for you, but it certainly is educational for us. I'm past being embarrassed on these shows, so it's all good. Lisa, try rethreading the top. I once had the thread come out of a take-up lever. Okay, you're right. I should try that. Turn off your machine and turn it back on. Works for computers. Haha. Yeah, sometimes it works for my head, too.
Another vote for that.
Did you turn off and restart, Diane? You guys are fantastic. Okay, so let's start by getting a new bobbin loading. How's that? Because it will take it a few seconds to load. So I will set this one aside so I don't lose track of what's what. Yeah, here's a new bobbin. Okay, so we'll get this loading. So that's my freestanding winder, right? So I've got that buzzing along. Now, let us try rethreading. Maybe we'll try power first. Everything off. Give it a couple of seconds. Everything back on. Of course, I have to put the bobbin back in, don't I? To see if that was the issue. Aha! Just because my head's shaped like a light bulb doesn't always mean I'm bright. Okay. So it's not that. So we're going to try wheel, or I mean needle position. We're just going to run down the list here. Doesn't matter. Mr. Producer's trotting around bringing me bobbins and everything. I feel like that's a little too far for the needle. It's a very small adjustment. I feel like if I turn it too far, it's going to break my thread too. And by the way, I have just a little knob on the top of my machine. That's where I store my magnet. Okay, that way is not doing it. Then I always know where this little bitty baby magnet is. I'll try a little bit to the other side. That's not cutting it. So the rocker, I can see it. It's not even moving underneath. Although the casing is spinning. It's a conundrum. Okay, old bobbin, set that aside so we don't get confused. New bobbin. Watch this, fix it like magic. Fingers crossed. No. Nope, that is not doing it, folks. Okay, what's left? Rethreading. Let's do that. We'll rethread the top. I'm just going to lock Lucy in position again. This might take a moment. So if you guys want to start telling funny stories, you go for it. Share them in the chat window. Now that I've messed with this thread, I do have a problem going on here, so we're just going to take that out completely. This is certainly a conundrum, you guys. It's not a thing I have had happen ever before. This is very difficult to rethread. I very seldom rethread my machine. I always just knot my new thread on and pull it through. I'm really struggling. There's no lint in there. Can you reach? I've got it locked in. You guys are so patient. I sure appreciate it. Isn't that funny? This is what I usually do. I usually do a loop. Yeah, you guys are very, very, very patient. I sure appreciate it. Do another lint clean. I thought it was clear because I did already clear it once this morning, but there was still a bit more in there. So we're trying everything here. Okay, we've got it in. Should be fine. I hope pretty music is playing for you guys. This is definitely taking time. We're just trying to make sure there's no twists going on.
There was one there. Yeah, there still is one. Let's see.
I think we're good. Okay. First half is done. Second half should go much more quickly, I think. All right, now I'm at the front where I can at least reach it. Who knew we'd get all this excitement when we started this morning, right? Again and again, bless you guys for your patience. You probably can't even see what we're doing, so it's deadly dull. But I've rethreaded the whole top of the machine right from the spool to the needle, so every pigtail, every intermittent tension is freshly threaded. I've got a new bobbin on, a new needle on, and there it is. Okay, let's try it on the quilt. There it is. So, note to self, rethreading can fix things miraculously. I mean, I have no idea what was wrong. I did not see any problem. You know, visually casting an eye over it did not show me any difficulties. So, yeah, I guess this is a little lesson. When all else fails, rethread, just to be sure. Looks like we're back in business. Okay, got my side clamps on left and right. Got my yardstick on. I need another sip of coffee just to get over that. Whew, okay. We have no magnets this time because we're on the last pass. So what I've done is I've just started, I've pulled up my bobbin thread about 1/4 inch before my passed thread tail that I left in there. And I've done about 5 stitches. Very close together to anchor that all in place, and then I'm going to stitch a little bit further and trim my threads, and I've laid down my scissors somewhere in all this process. Here they are. Got me out of my groove. I always put them in the same place on my machine, etc., etc. I'm a creature of habit. I'm going to leave regulated stitch on and just go for it. I'm going to do one last thing before I get very far, and that is to check the tension. My simple tension check is to run my nail really firmly against the stitching on the bottom of the quilt. So I can see on the top it's pulling just a little tighter than I'd rather, which is not a bad thing because then I know the bottom thread is coming up, right? So I'm just going to lower my top tension a hair and see how that looks. That looks really good. And by the way, a hair on a long arm, to me anyway, is about a quarter turn. We are in business, folks. Whew, that was exciting, wasn't it? It is a little bit frustrating when you don't know what the problem was because you don't know how to avoid it the next time. But I'm just grateful it's fixed. Years ago, I was in a class with Judy Robinson, who's a lovely quilter. And as I was still a fairly new quilter myself, but as I recall, she was the first person that I heard mention that you want to quilt down seams that are thick or sticking up. So in the case of this quilt, it does not have any particularly bulky seams, but the fact still remains, if you avoid those seams, then what happens when you release your quilt off the long arm, those seam allowances really pop upwards and catch the eye. So I took that really to heart from Jody, and that is one of the things I love best about freehand quilting, is it gives me the absolute freedom to fudge my stitching a little bit to be sure and catch seam allowances and get them firmly stitched down. So even on the ones on this quilt, you know, they're just regular four fabric intersections, but even so, I'm able to stitch them down, and it just produces a really sharp looking and flat quilt afterwards. Thanks to Jody for that tip. Like right in here, for example. See how I've just gone right over that intersection? Over it or very close to it will do the trick. I'm just going to roll Lucy back. I'm about a ½ an inch shy of being able to reach my front edge. And what's happening is when I want to travel in that basting stitch, I can't quite get to it. So I'm just going to pull my quilt up a wee little bit, and then I'll be able to. And I think you'll still be able to see nearest the bar pretty easily. Perfect. Well, a huge thanks to all of you that stuck around with me through the thick and thin. If you're enjoying this episode and finding it helpful, I would love if you would take the time to give a thumbs up to this video. It really helps other quilters to find it. My goal so much is just to help those who are maybe still unsure about their quilting to see, real life jobs in hand like you saw today. See that the oopses do happen, see that there are ways to work through, problem solve, and just to take some of the intimidation out of striking out freehand. So I appreciate you being here with me today. These live and unscripted episodes air the first and third Friday of every month. They are usually freehand and edge-to-edge projects like this. Occasionally I do some light custom work too. But always hopefully informative and certainly real life. Always that. If you're interested in supporting our show as we keep endeavoring to get a more and more polished product and to have better cameras that will show the quilting super well, you can do that if you wish at buymeacoffee.com. There for the price, /stitched by Susan. I'm sure Dave has put it in the chat window. My tongue is not fully in gear when my brain is quilting. Anyway, buymeacoffee.com /stitched by Susan. You can donate as little as the price of one coffee, $5, or you can choose a monthly membership if you so desire. And we sure appreciate those of you who contribute regularly. It has enabled us to do some great upgrades. The close-up camera that you're seeing that shows the stitching really well, that was our first big upgrade. It's a GoPro because they're built, not surprisingly, to handle vibrations and movement, and so it was a great choice for being able to show the quilting clearly. So we have loved that. If you are not already signed up for my newsletter, I encourage you to do that if you wish to see what's coming up on the next live and unscripted episodes, and also because I have some workshops coming up in the next few weeks, and more details about those will be in the newsletter. Dave's going to put a lovely link in the chat window for you if you wish to do that. And my newsletters are not super frequent. I try to just send them when I've got something to say, an event coming up that I think you'd be interested in. So workshops that have to do with this type of freehand edge-to-edge quilting, and also that introduce my freehand quilting masterclass, which is a pretty comprehensive teaching of over 30 freehand designs, and also my thought processes behind them. Because my goal is not just to teach 30 different designs, but to teach why I do things a certain way, what's a good feature of a design, what's a good characteristic, where can you find inspiration, and then set you free to find your own designs, devise your own original work. That's the super rewarding part. If you want any more information on that class, you can simply go to my website, which is stitchedbysusan.com. There's a tab at the top for the Freehand Quilting Masterclass, which has lots of info. You can also email me and ask questions. info@stitchedbysusan.com, and I would be happy to chat with you about it. We are nearing the end of this gorgeous quilt. And by the way, I have another one in the wings that is, the backing is a bit different, but the quilt top is very much the same. I would love some suggestions for what design might be good for that one. If you're regulars and familiar with my designs, you might have a suggestion. Or even a suggestion for something original I could try out. If you do have any questions or comments about this one, now's your last chance. Pop them in the chat window and we'll discuss. And there we are at the end. Well done, Lucy. If I ever figure out exactly what the problem was, I'll try and post notes about it with photos of this quilt. I don't at this point know where the problem lay. I mean, in the threading, but I don't know where specifically. So, where shall I go with young Lucy? Okay, you guys, I'm going to grab my coffee for one more restorative swallow or two, and let's take some comments.
Third, I don't know where these are in order, so this is begin.
Working at the comments. They're coming. They're coming. You have to wait till I can see them on my screen. Sue, I'm wondering if when you left your needle in when you were moving the quilt might have bent the needle slightly to cause the issue. I guess that's a consideration, Sue. I've done that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. It seems unlikely. But yes, we are kind of grasping at straws here, aren't we? Susan Clark, thanks for showing us your troubleshooting. Oh, no problem. My pleasure. Absolutely. Jeannie, we always learn something, Susan, and I, for one, am happy to watch what the pros do. I appreciate that, Jeannie. I mean, I do the same thing you do. I just try and think of different things to try. I appreciate you guys all chiming in with your ideas. That rethreading was the ticket. Diane, I can't remember the name of the quilt pattern. Can you put it in the comments, please? Topographical Meander is official. And sometimes I slip up and call it a topographical map in some of my posts. I notice I did one last week and sorry about that. Topographical Meander. Anitra, I love this E-to-E pattern. It really comes together quickly. It absolutely does. And there's no points and corners, and so it's really speedy to just move across the quilt. Lori, perhaps not for today's problem, but for general troubleshooting, I was taught TNT thread needle tension in that order. That's a good point, Lori. I have not heard that, but I think that's not a bad way to remember to try all those three things. Good one. Good point. Wendy, good job. It's always the last thing you try. Well, yes, because you don't keep trying things afterwards. But yeah, we were digging, weren't we, for things to try. Sabita, I'm a new long armor and have learned a lot from watching and listening to you. Thank you. I'm so glad. That makes me happy. Diane, there are needle threaders that will work with sewing machines, sergers, and long arms. I use one and they're $10 or less. Interesting. Honestly, I don't usually have trouble, Diane, except that when I'm on camera, I turn the light off on my machine because it makes the visibility better for you guys. So I'm kind of working in the dark. So that's when I have trouble threading my needle. It isn't usually an issue, but I appreciate that tip all the same. That might be good for someone else too. Any more? Diane, I meant the quilt pattern, not the quilting pattern. Ah, okay. Gotcha. Yes. It is a great quilt pattern, and it is particularly great for scraps. Oh, put the name in the comments. If we add them to the comments now, will that show up later?
No, we'll put it in the description.
I'll put it in the show notes below this YouTube episode. How's that? The name is An Old-Fashioned Quilt, but I can't off the top of my head remember what book it came from. I will find all those details from Laura, the maker, and I will put them in the show notes. So if you come back even an hour or two from now, I'll have them in there. Lauren, will I be notified when I can send another year of coffee?
I don't know how that works.
Honestly, Lauren, I think yes. I'm not 100% sure how that works because we've been doing this for less than a year, so I've never actually had someone cycle through that annual membership. It may be that it keeps going until you cancel. I would go to buymeacoffee.com and see if you can surf in there a little bit and ask that question, and I'm sorry I don't know the answer. Lauren, your masterclass has taught me so much, and I love that I can go back at any time for a refresher when needed. I think everyone should take this fantastic class. Well, thanks so much for the recommendation, Lauren. I sure appreciate it. Lauren is, in fact, one of my students. A few of you who are here today have been through the class. And I trust that this is kind of helpful and supplementary to these live and unscripted episodes for you. Diane, we saw this one, Dave, needle threaders. Mm-hmm.
I think that is all except for Joey says, congrats on getting
Joey, congrats on getting the unknown problem solved and make the remaining of your day problem free. Let us hope. For the quilt in the wings, what type of fabric is it? Does it lean to masculine or feminine? It's actually exactly like this one, Sue. It's the same, probably the same scrap pile, same colors, same everything. Just often Laura's backings differ a little bit. So I might change thread color up, but I would like to do a different design too. So you guys don't have any bright ideas for designs? I have a few ideas. I'm talking about them with Laura. We'll see what transpires. You'll probably see pictures of that over the next little while too. It's kind of fun sometimes to post a picture of two quilts that are very nearly identical with two different quilting designs, just to show that there's not one right thing. You know, there's multiple things that will work and all be equally beautiful. So that's fun to illustrate too. Betsy, if not on Facebook, where else can we get show notes? So the show notes are actually in YouTube. So they're like in the description of this video. And often it'll be right below the video. I'm not sure what device you're on. Often it will say show more, and you have to click on that in order to get the full paragraph. It usually has a description of the quilt that I'm working at, the sort of topics I'm discussing, often links for the tools that I'm using because I get asked those questions a lot, those sorts of things. And then for the photos, excuse me, for the photos, they're on both Instagram and Facebook. So if you're looking for, social media, just type photo clips of the quilt. They'll be on there. I also go back and edit the thumbnail, the little picture that comes with the video. Over the next day or two, I'll get one in there that's got the Quilted project in it. Obviously, I have to wait till after I quilt it to be able to create that little graphic. So,
on Pinterest, that's all.
I think that's it for today. So once again, these live and unscripted episodes are aired the first and third Friday of every month. The projects are always a little bit different. They are very frequently client quilts, and so it kind of depends what I get in as to what topics I talk about, but I'm always open to your asks. If you want to see a little more custom quilting or you want to see a particular design, I'll try and find a quilt that suits that, and then I can show you as I work through that. I would absolutely love if you would thumbs up this video and subscribe and even share the link to my channel to any of your quilty friends that you think would benefit. I'd really appreciate it. So, thank you so very, very much for joining me. A few last credits before we go. Our son Will does the intro voice. What was it today, Dave? I'm forgetting. It was Yoda today. Yeah, that was fantastic. Also, my husband, Mr. Producer, he's who I keep talking to off camera. I know that's kind of weird, but we have to stay in communication. But he's the one that keeps all the wires untangled and keeps all the things running smoothly. I hugely appreciate that. And then our good friend Dan, who graciously lets us use his music for these shows. So we appreciate Dan's wonderful guitar music. So until next time,